All my life, I was the shadow to my sister's spotlight, the forgotten child beneath the golden crown my parents placed on her head. But on my wedding day, the world finally saw who truly deserved to shine. And my revenge? It was as beautiful as it was brutal. From the moment I was old enough to understand love, I realized it came with conditions in my house, and I was never the one who met them. My sister Emily was the star, perfect grades, perfect smile, perfect daughter. My parents adored her like she was made of gold, and I was the dull reflection that barely mattered. When she got an A, the whole house celebrated with cake and laughter echoing through every room. When I got the same grade, my mom would mutter a half-hearted good job while scrolling through her phone. Birthdays were no different. Hers were decorated with balloons, gifts, and music, while mine were quietly forgotten or brushed off with excuses like, "We'll do something later." The truth was, later never came. Every photo on the walls was of her dancing, smiling, winning trophies, while my achievements sat in dusty drawers no one opened. I remember once falling off my bike, bleeding badly, and crying for help, but my mom rushed to Emily instead because she had twisted her ankle slightly during practice. That was the moment I learned pain didn't matter unless it belonged to Emily. Every compliment I got was followed by comparison. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" I started to believe maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I never would be. Even at school, teachers who met my family would say, "Oh, you're Emily's sister. She's wonderful," as if my identity existed only through her shadow. I laughed, pretended it didn't hurt, but inside, it carved deeper each time. I wanted to scream, to ask what I'd done wrong, but I stayed quiet because silence was safer. That was my childhood, a stage where Emily performed under bright lights while I clapped from the darkness, praying that one day, someone might finally see me. Growing up in that kind of house felt like being invisible, like my existence was only tolerated because it made Emily's perfection shine brighter. Every morning, Mom would fuss over Emily's outfit, brushing her hair and calling her my beautiful girl, while I struggled to find a clean uniform on my own. Dad would sit at the breakfast table reading the paper, only glancing up to compliment Emily's latest achievement, his proud smile reserved solely for her. I tried to join in, tried to talk about my day or share something exciting from school, but my words always fell into silence, swallowed by their adoration for her. Once, I painted a picture for a school competition. It took me days, but when I showed it to Mom, she barely looked up before saying, "That's nice, but Emily just got selected for the regional debate team." Her excitement for Emily's news erased mine instantly. I remember standing there, holding my painting, my fingers trembling as I smiled, and said, "That's great, Mom." Inside, though, it felt like my heart had been stepped on. Even our relatives played the same game. At family gatherings, they'd crowd around Emily, showering her with compliments while I lingered in corners, pretending I didn't mind. My grandmother once gave Emily an expensive necklace, calling her the pride of the family, then turned to me and said, "You'll find your talent one day." I already had talents, they just weren't hers. That constant overshadowing chipped away at me slowly, making me question my worth every single day. I stopped trying to compete, stopped hoping for equal love. Instead, I built quiet walls around my heart. But what they didn't know was that those walls were growing stronger, not weaker. And behind them, a storm of resentment and determination was starting to form, waiting for its moment. By the time I hit my teenage years, I had perfected the art of disappearing. I stopped expecting kindness, stopped asking for attention, and learned to survive in silence. Emily, of course, only grew brighter, captain of her cheer team, top of her class, and adored by everyone who crossed her path. My parents followed her every move like she was some celebrity, bragging to neighbors, posting about her awards online, and attending every single event she was part of. I, on the other hand, became the designated photographer, chauffeur, or helper, always behind the scenes, never in the spotlight. Once, during a school talent show, I performed a song I'd practiced for weeks. My parents said they'd come, but halfway through my performance, I looked out into the audience and saw the empty seats where they were supposed to be. Later that night, I found out Emily had an impromptu photo shoot for a magazine cover, and they couldn't disappoint her. They didn't even ask how my performance went. I smiled through dinner, pretending it didn't matter, but my chest burned with disappointment, so deep it felt like drowning. It wasn't just neglect. It was the way they made me feel like my existence was optional. When Emily and I fought, they always took her side, no matter what. I could be crying, trying to explain, and Mom would just sigh. "You know how sensitive Emily is. You should apologize." It was like I was living someone else's life, one where I was just an extra in a story that didn't belong to me. But quietly, in that suffocating loneliness, something inside me began to change. I stopped crying after each disappointment. I stopped waiting for apologies. Instead, I started watching, learning, and waiting for the moment life would give me even a sliver of power back. High school only made everything worse, because that's when the comparisons turned brutal. Emily was already a legend there. Everyone knew her as the smart, pretty, talented girl from a perfect family, while I was just her awkward younger sister trying to blend into the background. Teachers would light up when they heard her name and look at me with polite pity, as if wondering how the same parents could produce such different kids. I tried finding my own circle, my own voice, but even that was difficult. Whenever people learned who I was related to, their expectations shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't just me. I was Emily's sister, and that label followed me everywhere like a curse. Once, I got invited to a party by a friend from art class, and for a second, I thought maybe someone finally saw me for who I was. But the moment Emily showed up to pick me up later, everyone swarmed around her, laughing, taking pictures, forgetting I even existed. The drive home was silent, my chest heavy with humiliation. I remember gripping my sketchbook so tightly my knuckles turned white, promising myself that one day, I'd make them all see what they'd ignored for years. Even at home, things didn't change. If Emily broke a glass, Mom would laugh it off. If I did the same, it was a lecture about responsibility. If Emily got an A-, they'd comfort her like she'd failed the world. If I got an A, it was treated like nothing special. Over time, I realized I wasn't angry at Emily for being loved. It wasn't her fault. I was angry that no matter what I did, it was never enough. And deep down, that anger started turning into something colder, sharper, a quiet desire to one day balance the scales. College was supposed to be my escape, a chance to finally step out of Emily's shadow and start over somewhere no one knew our family's story. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe, like maybe I could finally figure out who I was without being compared to her. But even there, Emily found a way to take up space that wasn't hers. She got into the same university, of course, because our parents insisted it would be nice to have each other nearby. What they really meant was that I couldn't be trusted to make it on my own. The first week, everyone I met somehow already knew her name. "You're Emily's sister?" They'd ask, smiling wide. "She's amazing." And there it was again, the same old echo that had followed me my entire life. I tried to shrug it off, focused on my art classes, made a few quiet friends, and even got a small job at the campus cafe to support myself. But Emily managed to invade that too. She'd come in with her group of friends, dressed perfectly, laughing loudly, making me feel like a background extra in her glamorous life. Once, she even told one of my coworkers, "Oh, my sister's just working here for fun," as if my part-time job was some cute hobby instead of something I needed to survive. That night, I cried in the bathroom, not because of what she said, but because of how normal it had become to be belittled. The more she sparkled, the smaller I felt, until I started doubting whether I'd ever be enough for anyone. Not my family, not my peers, not even myself. But what I didn't realize was that this pain was quietly shaping me, hardening me, and preparing me for the day I'd finally stop playing the forgotten sister. The longer I stayed in college, the more I started seeing the truth about Emily that our parents refused to acknowledge. Behind that flawless smile and perfect image, she was manipulative, selfish, and cruel in ways only someone who's always been worshipped can be. She had learned how to twist every situation to make herself look like the victim or the hero, depending on what worked best for her. Once, she borrowed one of my art projects, saying she wanted to show it to a friend, and a week later, I saw photos of it displayed at an exhibition under her name. When I confronted her, she laughed and said, "Relax, it's not like you were going to win anything anyway." I wanted to scream, but years of being ignored had taught me that no one would believe me even if I did. Our parents, of course, praised her for her creativity and told me to be proud that my sister was inspired by me. Inspired? She'd stolen from me. But that's how it always went. Emily could set the house on fire and somehow make me look like the one holding the match. It didn't stop there. She started dating one of the few people who genuinely liked me on campus, claiming she hadn't known we were close. I remember standing at a party, watching them dance, my stomach twisting as everyone cheered them on like the perfect couple. That night, something inside me broke. Not from jealousy, but from the cruel realization that she would always take whatever I cared about just because she could. I promised myself then that I'd stop trying to beat her at her game. Instead, I'd play a new one, quietly and patiently. Because one day, Emily's golden crown would slip, and I would be there when it did. By the time graduation came around, Emily had already cemented her reputation as the family's eternal pride, while I had become the quiet, distant daughter who never seemed to measure up. She was offered a dream job through one of Dad's business contacts, and my parents acted like she had cured cancer. I had worked 2 jobs through college, paid my own rent, and graduated with honors. But to them, that was just what you're supposed to do. I didn't even get a family dinner to celebrate. All the focus was on Emily's new career. At the ceremony, I looked up from my seat, scanning the crowd for my parents. They were sitting in the front row, with flowers and a camera, for her. When it was my turn to walk across the stage, I caught their eyes for a brief moment, but they didn't wave. They didn't even smile. That tiny moment should have broken me, but instead, it did something unexpected. It made me numb. And in that numbness, a strange calm took over. For the first time, I saw my parents for who they really were. People blinded by their own favoritism, too shallow to recognize worth unless it glittered. That day, I stopped craving their validation. I started working hard for myself, not for them. I found a small apartment, took an entry-level design job, and began rebuilding from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, every inch of it. Meanwhile, Emily's so-called perfect life began to show cracks. Her job was demanding, her boyfriend cheated, and her friends started drifting away. Still, my parents pampered her, calling every day to comfort their sweet girl. And while they fussed over her chaos, I stayed silent, patient, and observant. Because I knew karma has perfect timing, and Emily's was slowly catching up. Emily's downfall didn't come all at once. It started slowly, like tiny cracks forming in the perfect glass image she'd built for herself. At first, she hid it well, pretending everything was fine, still posting smiling pictures and talking about her exciting projects. But behind that mask, she was struggling. Her company started downsizing, and she lost her job unexpectedly. The day she called me crying, it felt surreal. She had never needed me before, not once, and now she was sobbing into the phone, asking for help. For a brief moment, I felt sorry for her. Old habits die hard, and even after years of resentment, part of me still wanted to be the good sister. So, I invited her to stay with me for a while until she got back on her feet. My apartment was small, barely big enough for one person, but I made room for her anyway. And of course, the moment she arrived, the same patterns began to creep back. She took over my space, my things, even my peace. She complained about my furniture, my job, my routine, like she was too good for everything I had worked for. One night, she even borrowed one of my dresses and spilled wine on it, then laughed it off, saying, "You didn't like this one anyway, right?" I stared at her, realizing she hadn't changed at all. She was just broken and still entitled. But this time, I didn't cry or shrink back. I just watched her destroy her own illusion of perfection, piece by piece. And for the first time, I didn't feel inferior. I felt powerful. It was strange, almost addictive, watching the golden child unravel in front of me, realizing that maybe life had finally decided to give me the justice I'd been waiting for all along. Living with Emily was like living with a hurricane dressed in silk, beautiful from afar, but destructive up close. At first, I told myself to stay calm, to let her heal and rebuild, but she made it impossible. Within a week, my peaceful apartment felt like her personal kingdom. She left her clothes everywhere, used my makeup, borrowed my laptop without asking, and constantly criticized the smallest things about my life. "You still work there?" she'd sneer while sipping coffee I bought. "You could do better if you actually tried." The irony of her jobless state didn't escape me. My patience wore thin, but years of conditioning made it hard to confront her. She had this way of turning every argument into my fault, twisting my words until I doubted myself. One night, after another round of her complaining about how small my apartment was, I finally snapped. "If it's so small, then leave," I said quietly but firmly. The room went dead silent. She stared at me, stunned, as if she couldn't believe I'd spoken to her that way. Then she laughed bitterly and said, "You're jealous. You've always been jealous." That word hit me like a slap. Jealous? Of what? A woman who couldn't hold a job or a relationship because she believed the world owed her everything. For the first time in my life, I saw her not as my sister, but as a stranger who had taken too much from me. I didn't argue. I just walked to my room and closed the door, shaking but resolute. That night, as I lay awake, I realized I didn't owe her anything. Not kindness, not space, not forgiveness. And for the first time, I stopped feeling guilty for putting myself first. It was the beginning of my quiet rebellion. After that night, something in me shifted permanently. I stopped bending over backward to make Emily comfortable, and the balance in our dynamic started to change. She still acted like she owned the place, but now, I met her arrogance with silence instead of submission. Every sarcastic comment she made bounced off me like it no longer mattered. She noticed the change, of course. "You've become cold," she said one morning while scrolling through her phone. "You used to care more." I wanted to laugh. I had cared for so long that it nearly destroyed me. Now, I was just done. The tension grew thicker each day. She started staying out late, coming home drunk, muttering bitter things about how unfair life was. She blamed her ex, her boss, our parents, anyone but herself. One night, she broke down crying, slurring through her tears that she was tired of pretending to be perfect. "They don't love me either," she said. "They just love what I represent." For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. I could see it clearly. The fear, the emptiness she'd buried beneath all that arrogance. But pity doesn't erase years of pain. I simply handed her a glass of water and said, "Then maybe it's time to stop pretending." That was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. In that fragile silence, I realized Emily wasn't the villain I'd built up in my mind. She was just the product of the same broken parenting that had crushed me. The only difference was that she believed the lies they told her. Still, that didn't excuse the way she treated me. As she fell asleep on the couch, I stood there watching her, thinking how strange it was that the golden child had finally cracked, and I was the only one left standing strong. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's stay stretched longer than either of us intended. I tried to keep the peace, but her presence felt heavier every day, like a weight pressing down on the fragile calm I had built in my life. She was lost, restless, and angry at the world, but she took it out on me because I was there. Every morning, she'd wake up complaining about job rejections, yet she refused to apply anywhere seriously. "I can't work just anywhere," she'd say, as if the idea of humility was beneath her. I watched her waste away in self-pity, eating my food, using my Wi-Fi, leaving dishes piled up while she scrolled through social media and envied people doing better than her. It was exhausting, but I bit my tongue because I still felt some twisted obligation to help her. One afternoon, though, I came home from work and found she had invited friends over, without asking. They were drinking, laughing loudly, and one of them was sitting on my desk, flipping through my sketchbook. My personal work. My private art. Something in me snapped. I told them to leave, and the look Emily gave me was pure venom. "God, you're such a buzzkill," she spat. "No wonder no one likes you." The words were like old wounds reopening, but instead of crying, I stood taller. "This is my home," I said quietly. "If you can't respect that, you can leave tonight." Her friends fell silent, uncomfortable, while Emily stared at me like she didn't recognize the person standing in front of her. Maybe she didn't. That night, she packed her things in anger and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. As I stood in the quiet aftermath, I felt something new: peace. Not the temporary kind, but real, liberating peace that comes when you finally take back control of your own life. After Emily left, the apartment felt eerily quiet, but it was the kind of silence that wrapped around me like comfort instead of loneliness. For the first time in years, I could breathe without tension in my chest. No criticism, no comparisons, no one draining the life out of my space. I cleaned the mess she'd left behind. Empty bottles, makeup stains, a few broken pieces of my things, and with each wipe, it felt like I was erasing her chaos from my life. My parents called the next day, furious. Apparently, Emily had told them I'd kicked her out onto the street, leaving out every single reason that led to it. My mother's voice trembled with disappointment. "How could you do that to your sister?" she scolded. "She's struggling, and you're supposed to be family." I wanted to scream that I had been struggling my entire life while they looked the other way. Instead, I said calmly, "She's an adult. She can take care of herself." That silence on the line told me they didn't like hearing that version of me, assertive, firm, and done being their doormat. They hung up without saying goodbye. For a moment, I felt guilty, like the child version of me still seeking approval had woken up again. But then I looked around my apartment, small, peaceful, and mine, and the guilt began to fade. I knew I'd made the right choice. A few weeks later, I heard Emily had moved back home, and my parents were once again treating her like a wounded angel. Typical. But instead of feeling angry, I just felt detached. They could keep worshiping their golden child. I no longer needed their validation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in Emily's shadow. I was finally learning to live for myself, and that realization was the sweetest kind of revenge. As months passed, I poured all my energy into building a life that finally felt like my own. I threw myself into my work, took freelance art projects, and slowly began to gain recognition for my designs. It wasn't overnight success, but every small victory felt deeply earned. I didn't need applause or validation. Each accomplishment was a quiet reminder that I was capable, that I had always been enough. My parents rarely called anymore unless it was about Emily, which, honestly, was a relief. When they did reach out, it was always to guilt-trip me into reconnecting with her. "She misses you," Mom would say, her tone dripping with that familiar manipulation. You know she didn't mean any harm. I'd bite my tongue to stop myself from laughing. Emily never missed me. She missed control, attention, and someone to blame when her life fell apart. I refused to step back into that cycle. One evening, as I was sketching for a new project, I got a message from Emily out of nowhere. "Hey, can we talk?" it read. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. We met at a small cafe downtown, and seeing her after all those months was strange. She looked tired, hollow, and nothing like the golden sister I'd known. She smiled weakly and said, "I just wanted to apologize." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard right. For years, those words had been a fantasy, something I thought I'd never hear. But even as she spoke, something in her tone felt rehearsed, almost desperate. I listened quietly, waiting for the twist, because with Emily, there was always one. And when she finally said, "I need your help," I knew exactly why she was there. The apology wasn't for me. It was for her own convenience. Emily sat across from me, stirring her coffee as if it held all the answers to her problems. I watched her closely, trying to decide if the apology meant anything or if it was just another act in her lifelong performance. "Things haven't been easy," she said with a shaky sigh. "Mom and Dad are upset with me, my job applications keep getting rejected, and my savings are gone. I'm trying, but I don't know what to do anymore." Her voice cracked, and for a fleeting second, I saw the scared little girl beneath all the arrogance. But then she leaned in, eyes wide with that same entitled glint I knew too well, and said, "Could I stay with you again? Just for a while?" My chest tightened. It was déjà vu, the same cycle waiting to start all over again. I took a slow sip of my drink before answering. "No, Emily. Not this time." Her face fell instantly, disbelief flashing across her features. "What do you mean, no?" she demanded. "You can't just turn your back on me. You're my sister." I stayed calm, even though my heart was pounding. "I helped you before, and you treated me like I didn't matter. I won't do that again." She scoffed, trying to guilt-trip me. "Wow, you really think you're better than me now, don't you?" I smiled faintly, not with pride but with peace. "No, Emily. I just finally know my worth." She sat there speechless, eyes narrowing as if she couldn't comprehend that her control over me was gone. When she finally stood to leave, she muttered, "You'll regret this." But as I watched her walk away, shoulders slumped and confidence cracked, I knew I wouldn't. For the first time, I wasn't her shadow or her savior. I was just me, free and unafraid of choosing myself. After that conversation at the cafe, I thought I'd seen the last of Emily for a while, but I should have known better. A few days later, Mom called, her voice sharp with accusation. "How could you refuse your sister when she needed you?" she snapped. She told us everything. You just turned her away like a stranger. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom, she's not my responsibility. She's an adult. There was silence for a second. Then she hissed, You've changed. You've become cold. I almost laughed because, for once, being called cold felt like a compliment. I was tired of burning myself just to keep them warm. After that call, I stopped answering when my parents rang. I focused on my work, my peace, and my quiet life. But Emily didn't disappear as easily as I hoped. She started sending me guilt-laden texts, photos of her crying, long messages about how lonely she was, and how I was the only one who ever understood her. The manipulation was so obvious it almost made me sad. Once upon a time, those messages would have shattered me. I would have rushed to her side, desperate to prove I was a good sister. But now, I saw them for what they were, attempts to pull me back into her web. I stopped replying altogether. That silence must have driven her crazy because soon after, I heard from a mutual friend that Emily had started badmouthing me to relatives, calling me selfish and heartless. I didn't even bother defending myself. Let her talk. Let them all believe whatever they wanted. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to see my side. I knew my truth, and that was enough. The golden child's glow was fading, and I was finally shining without needing her light. Weeks turned into months, and my life became beautifully simple. I had cut ties with the endless drama, and for the first time in years, my phone wasn't a source of anxiety. I started waking up to peace instead of panic, spending my mornings sipping coffee by the window, sunlight spilling across my art table. My business grew steadily, and my clients appreciated my creativity and dedication, two qualities no one in my family had ever acknowledged. Sometimes, though, in the quiet moments, I'd catch myself thinking about Emily, not with anger anymore, but with a strange mixture of pity and relief. She had always been the star, the center of every room, but that spotlight had turned harsh without an audience to feed it. One evening, Mom left me a voicemail. Her tone was softer than usual, almost broken. Your sister's not doing well, she said. She's the lost. She needs help, sweetheart. Please don't give up on her. I sat there listening to her words over and over. A part of me wanted to rush back like I always did, to be the fixer, the peacemaker. But another part of me, the stronger, wiser part, knew that if I did, it would only drag me back into the same darkness I had fought so hard to escape. I deleted the voicemail and whispered to myself, I'm not her savior anymore. It felt cold, maybe even cruel, but it was the truth. Healing sometimes means letting others face the consequences of their own choices. I had spent years trying to earn love that was always conditional, trying to save someone who didn't want saving. Now, my only mission was saving myself. And for once, I was succeeding. The silence that used to feel lonely now felt like freedom, and I wasn't about to give it up again. A few months later, fate decided to test my resolve. I was at work, in the middle of a client meeting, when my phone buzzed nonstop. At first, I ignored it, but when the same number kept flashing again and again, I excused myself to check. It was my dad. He rarely called, so I answered, and his voice came through shaky and urgent. Your sister's in the hospital, he said. My stomach dropped. For a second, all the walls I'd built came crashing down. I rushed to the hospital, not sure what to expect, my mind spinning with guilt, anger, and dread. When I finally saw her, Emily looked nothing like the person I remembered. She was pale, thinner, her eyes dull and defeated. The nurse told me she had collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. Apparently, she'd been struggling to make ends meet and hadn't been taking care of herself. Seeing her like that hit me harder than I expected. She looked fragile, almost human again. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. You came, she whispered, like she couldn't believe it. I nodded, my heart torn between compassion and resentment. Of course I did, I said quietly. For the next few hours, I stayed by her side while my parents fussed over her, acting as if I had done something wrong for not being there sooner. But this time, their guilt-tripping didn't work. I wasn't there because they demanded it. I was there because I chose to be. When Emily finally drifted off to sleep, I sat in silence, watching her breathe, realizing something profound. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't even envy her. I just saw her for what she truly was, a flawed, broken person trying to survive, just like me. And somehow, that realization set me free in a way revenge never could. When Emily was discharged, I drove her home, and the silence between us was heavier than it had ever been. She stared out the window, avoiding eye contact, while I tried to gather the courage to say what had been building up inside me for years. Finally, I broke the silence. "Emily," I said softly, "I'm not your enemy. I never was." She blinked, her expression confused, almost like she didn't know how to respond. "Then why did you hate me so much?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath. "Because you never saw me. You had everything. Our parents' love, attention, admiration, and I was invisible. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was enough." She turned to look at me then, her eyes wet, and for once, she didn't argue. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way," she said quietly. I got used to being the favorite. I thought that's how things were supposed to be." Hearing her admit that hit harder than I expected. There was no grand apology, no tears of redemption, just a quiet acknowledgement that maybe she finally understood. I nodded slowly. "I'm not asking for an apology," I said. "I just need peace. And that means setting boundaries, even with you." She gave a small, shaky nod. "I get it." When I dropped her off at our parents' house, Mom rushed out, arms open, showering Emily with affection as if she'd returned from war. I watched them from the car, that same old ache surfacing, but this time it didn't sting like before. I simply smiled to myself and drove away. I wasn't running anymore. I was choosing peace, and for the first time in my life, that felt like victory. Time passed, and though Emily and I didn't become close, something between us quietly shifted. We weren't fighting anymore, and that in itself felt like a small miracle. She'd send me the occasional text, simple things like, "Hope you're doing okay," or "Your art looks amazing." And while it wasn't much, it was something real, something that didn't come with strings attached. I didn't expect forgiveness or some dramatic reunion. I just appreciated the calm after years of chaos. My parents, on the other hand, still hadn't changed. They continued to treat Emily like she was delicate glass, praising her for every little thing while ignoring anything I did. But now, it didn't hurt the way it used to. I'd learned that I didn't need their approval to feel proud of myself. I had built a life they never believed I could, a career, a home, a sense of self-worth that didn't depend on anyone else. One day, Emily called and asked if we could meet for lunch. I hesitated but agreed, more out of curiosity than obligation. Over sandwiches and coffee, she smiled faintly and said, "I'm trying to get better, you know. Therapy, job hunting, all that." I was surprised to hear that. There was honesty in her voice that hadn't been there before. "That's good," I said. "I'm proud of you." She laughed softly. "Funny, I used to think you hated me. Maybe I deserved it." I looked at her for a moment and said, "I didn't hate you, Emily. I just hated the way things were." For the first time in our lives, she didn't argue. She just nodded and whispered, "Me too." It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a perfect bow, but it was peace, the quiet, lasting kind that doesn't need words to prove it's real. Years later, looking back, I can finally say that everything I went through, every wound, every unfair moment, every tear shed in silence, was worth it because it led me here. My relationship with my family never fully healed, and maybe it never will, but that's okay. I stopped trying to fix people who never wanted to change. My parents still adore Emily, and she still gets the easy praise, but now I understand something powerful. Their favoritism was never a reflection of my worth, only of their blindness. I no longer crave their approval or their love. I've learned to give that to myself. My art career flourished beyond what I'd imagined. I even opened a small studio, filled with warmth, creativity, and peace, the kind of space that feels like home. Sometimes Emily visits, bringing coffee and stories about her new job. She's changed in small but genuine ways. She no longer carries that smug entitlement in her voice, and when she looks at me, I can tell she finally sees me, not as competition, not as a threat, but as her sister. The first time she said, "I'm proud of you," I didn't know how to respond. I just smiled and said, "Thanks, Em. I'm proud of you too." It wasn't dramatic or emotional, it was just real, and that was enough. The truth is, revenge didn't give me peace, letting go did. My greatest victory wasn't proving my worth to them, it was realizing I never had to. The little girl who once begged to be noticed finally stopped begging and started living. So now, when I think about everything that happened, I don't feel bitterness anymore. I feel gratitude. Because losing their approval was how I finally found myself. And that was the sweetest revenge of all.